Hello, good evening. I'm Paula Rothermel, and I'm going to be talking about my current research and research that I undertook when I was at the University of Durham. First of all, a little bit about myself. I've been involved in home education research in the United Kingdom since 1996, and this has involved many appearances at conferences, international and national, and radio and television interviews, and the publication of research over the years. For the last 12 years, I've also worked as a chartered educational psychologist, expert witness at court. I work in any court case where home education is an issue. Typically, these involve care cases and divorces, which are in the civil courts, and school attendance order, which are in the United Kingdom in the criminal court. During the 2009 British Review of Home Education, I was invited up to Westminster to provide the government with some input, and that was followed up with my presenting at a conference at Westminster, and my work's been cited, I'm not quite sure, I think 5 times in the House of Commons. I'm going to talk today about, so I'm just bringing it up, I'm looking at a different screen, the importance of parental involvement in children's learning. For years, parents have been made to feel that their input is of less value than that of schools. However, research focusing on children's learning outside school shows that the value of parental input should not be underestimated. What really motivates children is love, and this can be interpreted in terms of parental involvement. Input can involve just as little as just being there for the child, answering and helping to answer questions as and when they arise, and facilitating resources and activities. This has become a really interesting topic for me recently, although my research is from a few years ago, because I see an ever increasing, it seems, push to put children earlier into school. I live in Switzerland, and children actually, in the area where I live, children actually start school in their 7th year, and that's just about to change to harmonise throughout Switzerland, and children will be starting school between 4 and 5, so it's become quite a hot topic for me. So back in the 1980s, Jack Tizard and Barbara Hughes wrote their seminal book, Young Children Learning. They found that parents had the advantage of understanding the context of their children's lives in a way that teachers couldn't. In the last line of their book, they write, "In our opinion, it's time to shift the emphasis away from what parents should learn from professionals and towards what professionals can learn from studying parents and children at home." Their findings lend support to the idea that parental input is not just a useful support tool, but a powerful source of children's learning potential. In a later study, Jack Tizard concluded that teachers responded better to children whose company they most enjoyed. And we all know the value for a child of having a teacher they really like. In terms of what a parent can offer, it's clear that those with the most invested in their children's development are the parents. Parents are likely to respond well to their children, and vice versa, so this is reciprocated by the children. Other research has described this as a cycle of positive attribution. That's Giorgio, 1999. Tizard and Hughes' study looked at conversations between adults and children at home and at school. They found that substantial discussions in the home were replaced by more subdued performance at school, with children taking a more passive role. They suggested that a shy child at school could easily be misjudged as being like this at home. The researchers found that home children were found to hold 27 conversations an hour, averaging 16 terms, whilst at school these same children had about 10 conversations an hour, averaging 8 turns. Home-based conversations covered a wide variety of topics, and children were found to ask approximately 26 questions an hour. These conversations took place in a variety of settings as families went about their daily lives. During the conversations and questions, the children could be seen trying to make sense of their world using why questions, assimilating new information and adapting what they already knew to fit with new ideas and findings. At school, children's conversations were more limited and less intellectual, whilst the number of questions per hour fell to approximately 5, and most conversations were more likely to cover process relating to school. Professor Carol Aubrey, who is my first supervisor for my PhD, has stressed in her research the rich informal knowledge that children bring into school. It's possible to infer from her remarks that parents play a role in the gathering of such knowledge. The Australian, or Anglo-Australian psychologist, who's also written about home education, Alan Thomas, speaking about the love of literature he observed by children in his study, attributed this to the children's exposure to dialogue, that is, home-educated children, and to the way in which the parents responded to their children as individual learners. He found, or he writes, the best support for the proposal that school-aged children can go on learning as they did in infancy comes from those parents who, when their children reach school age, just go on doing what they were already doing. These parents are simply continuing their children's apprenticeship to the culture. It's Thomas, 1998. Researchers in a Californian study examined the way in which parents can be important resources in the home learning environment of young children. Parents from 50 families involved reported that at home their children asked complex questions involving topics such as biology, physics and behaviour. They found that parents felt good about being involved in these questions and encouraged this style of learning. This contrasts with observations made by Tim Coulson from the United Kingdom from the Qualifications and Curriculum Authority, who stated, often parents do not have a clear idea of what their children can do, how they can best help them, and how their children are doing compared to other children in the class. This view represents a genre of professionals who have done so much to undermine parent power by making parents believe that they need instruction in supporting their parents' learning. Also at odds with the standard view are the findings of, from my own research during my time at the University of Durham. I found that children who were educated at home during their primary years perform at least as well as school children, even where their parents have little formal education beyond school. What this tells us is that the added value of school during the early years, over and above parental input, is perhaps not as significant as often thought. I found that home-educated children from working-class families excelled over their middle-class peers. This important finding suggests that the general assumption that children from poorer backgrounds are not going to do well may be a school effect rather than one of class. This hypothesis is further supported by government-based research from Deforge and Albashar in 2003 and Silver et al. 2003, again, government-supported research. Those sets of research found that after all other factors are accounted for, parental input is the most important factor in children's attainment. Of course, the question is, if that is so, why is there a push to put children into school earlier and earlier? Whilst my own findings relate to home-educated children, they provide the clearest insight yet into what parents can achieve in terms of helping develop their children's potential. Outside school, children absorb their knowledge gradually by virtue of informal repetition and assimilation through everyday learning, involving the natural process of dialogue and exploration. This style of acquiring information has been found by researchers to be more readily retained than that acquired didactically at school. The eminent child psychologist, Professor Annette Karmeloff-Smith, has described the way in which children take on board information from the external world, reorganizing it internally and combining it through conflict and or agreement with previously internalized knowledge, eventually attaining mastery over the situation. Her work resembles, of course, the ideas of Piaget. She described this process as representational redescription, and it is this process that fits so well with the idea that parents are well placed to support their children's personalized learning. Further support for my view that informal learning is an undervalued source comes from the work of Pine, Messer and Godfrey in 1999. They looked in the effects of didactic and guided learning of a balancing task using symmetrical and asymmetrical rods with a fulcrum. Whilst the taught group received instruction, a control group had none, being allowed to practice alone with the rods and the fulcrum. The results showed that before intervention, all the children scored poorly on the task. Following intervention, all three groups improved significantly. The two taught groups demonstrating a substantial improvement over the control group, with significant difference appearing between the didactic and control groups. 1 week later, without any further intervention, the didactic group had regressed in their on-task ability, and the guided participation group had remained at virtually the same level. The control group, however, who had had no instruction, had improved to a level exceeding the guided participation group, showing a rise of 1.3 points, contrasting with 0.07 for the guided participation group and minus 0.43 for the didactic group. This experiment lends weight to Karmeloff-Smith's theory of an incubation period within her representational redescription model, and thus serves to illustrate the ability of children to organize their own learning. In an analysis of over 1,000 lessons, Professor Diane Montgomery of Middlesex University found that 70% of periods where pupils and teachers were interacting was taken up by the teacher talking, whilst just 1% involved cognitive challenges where pupils worked things out for themselves rather than being fed facts. She believes that this is partly the fault of an overloaded curriculum, which leaves little time for creative thought. The findings of Tizzard and Hughes and the other research I've mentioned serve to emphasize the true value of informal and self-motivated learning. I further explored the joy that children children learning informally and families learning together experience. The value of happiness has been addressed by the London School of Economics Professor Layard, who's found that happiness translates into positive financial gain. Thus, by facilitating your children's informal learning, they may become not only more motivated and able, but happier too, which in turn can bring about improved benefits for prosperity. The many findings across the years lend strong support to the lobby for later schooling. Nevertheless, the idea that children have a critical learning period, despite being unsubstantiated through research with humans, has found common ground amongst politicians across Europe. The research we have about a critical learning period, I should add, relates to work with animals and not with children. My own research supports the idea that there may in fact be a leap in learning at about 4 years of age. In the UK, research indicates that this is a result of early interventions helping children to learn. It's said often that school is responsible for this leap, and therefore children should go in earlier so that they can be helped to make the leap even larger, higher. What I found, however, is that children learning outside school in my research learned even more effectively during this time. Excuse me, I've got a fly there. Taking a much larger leap, what that tells me is that this leap is a maturational leap, and it doesn't matter whether the child's in school or out of school, but in fact by having them out of school, their little brains are perhaps even more receptive, and they're not being narrowed down by being guided into a specific curriculum designed by politicians. It concerns me that whilst educators and policymakers think that young children have optimal brain plasticity at this time, that they should use this to pump children full of specific information. My research indicates that this is perhaps the ideal time to leave children alone and let their brains mature without having a government agenda forced on them. That if we are looking to create innovation in our next generation, the last thing we should be doing is prejudicing children's brains at the very time they should be left open to wonder at the world and start to make sense of it for themselves. If I was to have some tips for parents, I was asked this a little while ago, I would say always answer your child's questions, even if only to say that you don't know the answer. Talk with your children as much as possible. This shows them that you're interested, which itself is a motivation for them. Facilitate your children's learning as much as possible. Help them to join the library. Get out the game that they're asking for. Set up the computer program they want but can't manage by themselves. Always have time for your children. Too quickly the time passes and the opportunity is gone forever. Tell your children that you love them. Research shows that love has a positive effect on the brain and on children's learning. When children know a parent is committed and involved, this motivates them and can override other factors such as being poor, having a single parent, or being part of an ethnic minority. Action speaks louder than inaction. If your child's difficult or challenging, think about how you can alter the environment to one that they find easier to live with. And always have faith in your ability to nurture your child's learning. I'm going to go now onto the screen and just go through my research. My research is now from 2002, but I'm going to talk you through it because that's the basis of what I've been talking about today, and that's where my ideas stem from. And since I finished that, I've been working in the courts and continued with my work with home education. I'm taking it that everybody can see the screen now. Now, if anybody can't, perhaps they can raise a hand and let me know. So my research was home education aims, practices and outcomes. It's based in the United Kingdom, and I've just put up there the law in the United Kingdom. The law makes it clear that home education and school education carry equal weight. The local authorities, local education authorities, have no automatic right of access to a parent's home. Parents do not need to meet the local authority, but they do need to offer some way of demonstrating that they're providing an education. So in the United Kingdom, the local authorities don't have a remit to authorize home education. The choice lies very firmly with the parents. Nobody needs a teaching qualification or any specialist equipment. I'm sorry, somebody's just asked me a question. I'm just going to answer that. Did the studies account for elders? I think I'll answer that at the end, if you don't mind, Catherine. I don't quite understand the question. I know, sorry to interrupt. It's all right, don't worry. It's just I can't work out the question. Do the studies account for elders? Do you mean elder children or elders in the community? You're not answering me. We'll come back to that at the end.
Do you want me to give Kathy Ann microphone privilege? Now she can ask you.
Yes, please. Yes.
Kathy Ann, press your talk button at the top to the left, and you can ask.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I was kind of staging that for at the end because I was very curious. I'm interested in what you're saying. I needed to put it down.
Right. Okay, so should we go back to that at the end?
Thank you.
Yeah, okay. Catherine. Right. Okay, so, yes, back to points on my bulleted points here. Some families follow a routine and some don't. Some are known to the local authorities, some aren't. Families who have never been to school in the United Kingdom are under no obligation to inform anybody. And to deregister a child, the parent simply needs to inform the head teacher or the proprietors, which would be the governors. Things are just slightly different in Scotland, but it's many similarities as well. So in the United Kingdom, we don't have a clear definition of home education, which we do as a phrase we use mostly in not homeschooling. It's not an education wholly at home, obviously, because much of it happens outside. We might say home because parents are committed to it, and it's definitely not wholly within a school, not subject to the regulations of schooling. It's governed very much by the European Convention on Human Rights, which says that no person shall be denied the right to an education. In the exercise of any functions which it assumes in relation to education and teaching, the state shall respect the right of parents to ensure that such education and teaching in conformity with their own religious and philosophical convictions. As you might be aware, though, although Germany adheres to the European Convention of Human Rights, I think they interpret this point rather differently, in that the state has overall authority to determine what is an education, and it doesn't like home education. So in the United Kingdom, there's, I would say, a large minority who are educating what we call autonomously, with self-directed learning. In England and Wales, we don't have a clear definition of what a suitable education is. It's said to be one that prepares children for life in a modern civilized society. The reason we don't have a clear definition is because England operates through case law, whereby laws are made through cases that come to court, and that gives us arguably ever murkier clarifications. So there is a continual argument about exactly what is an education. In the United Kingdom, we don't know how many home-educated children there are, since nobody has to register. Perhaps 100,000. It's just not possible to tell. So my study built upon previous work from England, Wales and Scotland. I've got to list a few of them there. It's often said there's a dearth of information about home education or the home education research in the United Kingdom, but I'm not sure that's really true at all. So just jumping ahead here, I looked at 419 home educating families, which covered 1,099 children. Obviously, those are quite odd figures, but I received over 1,000 questionnaires, but time and resources made me stop at a point where I'd sent 419 off to an analyst at the university, and I just drew a line under at that point, so I didn't get over swamped with data. I keep moving like one more button. So this is the basis of my 2002 research. I started with a questionnaire survey, and I went on to use educational data with some assessment. A baseline assessment, which is still used throughout England, is now translated into eight languages, and thousands and thousands of children, hundreds of thousands of children have used the same assessment that I used. And I used national literacy tests as well. So I looked in England at children aged 4, and at the end of a 9-month period, when they were 5, that was beginning and end of reception year, children aged 6 to 7, and then children aged 5 to 6, 7 to 8, and 9 to 10. What's particularly interesting about my research is that when I started, I didn't intend to assess so many children. I started with a qualitative idea for my research, and then I bumped into somebody at the university that said, oh, would you like to trial some of our tests on your cohort? And that led me into the assessment aspect of my study. So when I sent out the survey, there was no question of me suggesting that there would be an assessment aspect to the research because I hadn't myself thought about it. So some people have said, oh, the people who answered your survey obviously had clever children because they were anticipating participating in assessment, but that's not in fact the case because the survey made clear this was a qualitative and not a quantitative research. People did have the option to remain anonymous or to give me their names and addresses, and just about everybody did. And then I approached people, everybody in the cohort who had children in the right age groups. And of all the families I approached, just one said no. I also used psychological data and used some psychological and social tests or assessments with children. So this was a nice study because it covered a qualitative, quantitative and psychosocial aspect of children, and it remains to date the largest study ever undertaken in the United Kingdom. The questionnaires brought me answers about how people are home educated. They tend to do some work in the morning and the afternoons are left to play. The national curriculum, nobody really likes that. What families most valued was time together. And when I asked about advantages and disadvantages to home education, many people said the disadvantage was isolation within the community. So it wasn't them isolating themselves, it was that the community isolated them. And assessment. Assessment was ongoing. So we had the alienation from the wider community, which many people found distressing. There was an idea that families were searching for something. People weren't committed to home education from beginning to end. It was the idea that this is what we're doing at the moment. And I found many families have children in and out. And I think now when people come to me or when I'm in court, there's this idea that if a child's been home educated at 5, that the mother is wanting to do that until the child's 18. But of course, just because someone's educating at 5 and they may have a plan to perhaps educate till 7, it doesn't mean that that's going to go on forever. And I think there's quite a narrow understanding of home education in the United Kingdom that, people aren't going to be flexible, whereas the fact on the ground from home educating families is that they're indeed very flexible. And flexibility is the essence of home education. What I found quite curious is the idea that people do work to the school year. Because if I ask people for a timetable, they say, we don't have a timetable. And I said, well, I found it out as I went along. But of course they have a timetable because many children play with children in their local area. And that means that they're dictated to by the school timetable. They have to wait for their friends when they come home from school. They play with their friends more in the term time than more in holiday time than term time. So whether you like the school year or not, you're somehow stuck with it. Then I found change over time. Families started off with an idea that I found altered over the 3 or 4 years of my study. I found some people did start off with the idea that they would be home educating forever, and that I saw that changing. Perhaps they had 4 children and one child went into school over the time I was looking at the family. And the approaches, of course, changed. This is in England, when you do give the local authority notification that you're home educating, they might ask for a plan. And the problem is, if you give them a plan, they'll come back a year later and say, did you follow the plan? Whereas many home educators may well start with a plan, but that will change. And they change and adapt over time. They change their philosophy. What works with one child might not work with the next. And of course, the parents themselves change. The longer people do home educate, the more the parents' friendship groups will be interlinked with home educating other home educating parents. So when I'm in court now, the court, of course, doesn't understand that home education is a lifestyle choice, and by determining that a child should no longer be home educating will have repercussions for the entire family. What I found, which was curious as well, was a lot of long-term breastfeeding. I got to recognise that as the years went on. I'd started out at the beginning. I probably thought that people breastfed for a few months, but then I realised that people breastfed for a year, and as the research went on, I realised that I was visiting families that were feeding perhaps 3 children, you know, of 1, 3 and 5. Of course, if you're home educating, you need to keep at home the equivalent of one income, or lose the equivalent of one income. And so once the mother is not working, I found that people that might have started off with 2 children, before long, if the mother's not going to work, they think, well, why not have another child? And of course, if you don't need to stop breastfeeding to prepare the children for school, well, you might as well keep on at it. And then finally, as I've already mentioned, I found the joy of home educating. Families thoroughly enjoying home educating. And again, this is connected with the lifestyle aspect of home education, that it isn't just about education and opting out of school. It is a style of life that brings with it great enjoyment for the parents of being with the children. I should just go back, actually, one aspect I don't mention here, which I found really interesting, is as particularly with the parents whose children come out in secondary school, is that those parents may well have left school themselves at 15 or 16, but as they wanted to keep up with their children, they started to study. And the more they studied, then they started after a while, and I found this in quite a number of parents, they started doing distance university or night school themselves. And as time progressed, they then wanted a job. And so sometimes before the children had finished their secondary age education, and sometimes afterwards, the parents went into the workplace, but at a totally different level and an earning capacity. So through home education, the parents raised their earning capacity by educating themselves when they may, as I say, may have left school at 15 with no qualifications. On my baseline assessments with the young children, I found that 64% of the children scored over 75% on the assessment, whereas nationally we would expect this level to be just 5.1%. End of reception data, which we're going to see on the next slide, suggests that their progress over the year was less than that associated with school-teach children, but that was offset by the home-educated children's high baseline scores. Oh, somebody says, wow. Right. I think it's not that home-educated children are more intelligent. That would be rather a bizarre thing to think. I do think there's some merit in the idea that children become, as they're following the national curriculum, their awareness of the world about them becomes narrowed, whereas my children didn't have that, and I think that's why they scored more. Here we go. Nice picture here. Here we've got the average national score of 54 here at the bottom. The blue dots are my children. As we can see, their average score is 97. So my children I say my children, this is my cohort. There's about 35 children in this group, scoring nicely above the national average. These are supposed to be non-curriculum based tests. Here we have the end of the section maths. You can see that my class mean is going in line with the national mean, which is lower. But of course those children are being taught some maths, and my children, for the most part, are being taught no maths at all. And look where they are. Nice and high. With reading, we can see them converging, but actually in my work with the older children, 6, 7, 8 and 9-year-olds, they still hadn't crossed. So my children are slowing down, and the national mean are going up more steeply, but mine, until they're entering secondary school at least, I can say that mine was still ahead. I found that children from the lower end of the socioeconomic class scale significantly outscored those from the upper spectrum of the scale. Now the reason I think this is that, it's slightly convoluted, but although the test, the PIPS test, is supposed to be non-curriculum based, of course it's designed by people that are very aware of the school curriculum. And I think that I think that's probably an English term, working class, a very English term, working class. But the parents of the working class parents came under more peer pressure from their own parents and parents-in-law to have their children learning what was going to be expected of them in school. And I think that's why those children, those home-educated children, outscored the middle-class home-educated children who had the very laid-back, laissez-faire parents, you know, if my child doesn't read by 11, who cares? And nobody really watching them in the way that the children from the poorer families had family and local authorities on their backs. I did some national literacy project work with children aged 7, 9 and 11. Just to see here, you can see that my children, there's a ceiling point in standardized scores, so you can't score higher. So there are my children scoring rather well. 68% of the children are expected to score between 85 and 115. And I found just 70% scored within that expected range, whilst 80% of my children scored in excess. With 19 of the children scoring, well, actually scoring above the highest measurable. That makes sense because they're standardized. They just have to sit on the top line. Working with the idea of a bell curve distribution. I'm sorry I haven't got a picture of a bell curve, but it's, I don't know if you can see my mouse, but it would just go like that, looks like a bell. We expect to find 16% of children in the top band. Percentages of the home-educated children in this score band for literature were as follows. We can see that it's above 16% in each case. And in maths, using that same concept, you can see again the home-educated children scored rather well. And these are for the most part, are children that are not receiving tuition. They're not having sit-down lessons at a table. They might have a little bit of informal learning in the morning with parents, but not very much. For my social and psychological data, I looked to see if the home-educated children experienced social or behavioural problems, and overall I found that they were socially adept and didn't display any behavioural problems above the norm. What I did find is that they had some problem with negative aspects, such as being criticised, And I think that's because they were learning in a positive attributional environment, and perhaps weren't so good at handling either making complaints or receiving complaints. But I would argue there's plenty of time to learn that in the future. I found that the useful points that I learned from the home educated sample didn't come out of the assessments. It was the qualitative aspects that were interesting, such as the joy of education and the time together and the way the children were motivated by having parental attention. I found poverty was an indicator of poor academic outcomes. I do tend to think that that is school that introduces the poverty aspect. If you've got motivated parents, interested in their children, it doesn't matter how poor they are. The children will respond well. The answer there for me is not to put children into school earlier, but to actually support the parents that need the support to be able to work at home or in their communities with their children during the early years. There is a possibility my children performed well in the tests, because I always say they were sat there with a cup of cocoa and in an armchair perhaps taking the test, and not at a hard wooden table in a row. In terms of the outcome of my assessments, the parents certainly underestimated what their children could do. That was quite interesting. It was quite an exciting finding. Some parents say, oh, little Johnny can't read at all, but little Johnny could actually read because he'd been watching his parents read. There was evidence that children had quite a good idea of their own limitations and knowing what they knew and what they didn't know. Learning in families was negotiated and differentiated for each child. The test results gave no real insight into what these children knew. My research found that children's learning was best described as multidirectional and multi-layered. And that's not a model that's provided for by a standard test. If agencies adopt psychosocial norms by which to judge such children, they're almost inevitably going to find these children to be outside the norm. What is desirable behaviour from a school child is very different from what's deemed to be desirable behaviour from a home-educated child. I found that for instance, one of the items in the psychosocial assessments that I used ask if your child enjoys their own company, and if the child doesn't, if the answer is yes, then the child scores more lowly than a child that says no. But of course, a home-educated child, not to say they spend a huge amount of time necessarily in their own company, but they do learn to be with themselves, and it's not seen as a negative aspect. Of course, many home-educated children actually tend to be in quite large families, as it happens. But still, then there's researchers some time on their own. In conclusion, from my research, I found that children demonstrated high levels of attainment of good social skills. Common to all families was a flexible approach. The children benefited from parental attention and the freedom to develop their skills at their own pace. Families enjoyed strong bonds, and parents were committed to providing a nurturing environment for their children. Thank you very much. I'm going to look at questions. Where shall I go? Yes, Maisie, hello.
Maybe if someone wants to ask a question, they can raise their hand and I can give them a microphone for a video.
Right. Okay. So if anybody's got a question, if they'd like to raise their hand, then Maisie, who's helping me, will be able to give you a microphone. Are there no I can't see anybody's got a raised hand.
Here, Kathy.
Hello, Kathy Ann. Are you there?
I'm trying. I think I am now. Yes, now it says I am.
Yeah.
I can try again on the question. Hi. Thank you. I'm so enjoying this. And the reason that I asked the question was because the U.S. studies of Head Start and the need to start children early were thrown off by children that had a grandmother. That if they had a grandmother at home, an attentive adult who listened to them, they didn't need to go to school early. And so they had to drop them as a qualifier. And I just wondered if there was anything similar in the studies in the UK of if home, it may not have the parents, especially in the working class families, but has a special person.
Yes, I've seen quite a strong influence from grandparents helping with the home education. And yes, mother may go out to work or may have to work part-time, but certainly I have seen grandparents being involved in the home education, and it seems to be very positive. I've seen that the Head Start studies are slightly thrown off. In the United Kingdom, we hear a lot about research showing that early intervention is good for children, but I suppose with Chinese whispers, what comes out is that's an overall blanket, early education is good for children. But actually the research is done with underprivileged families and doesn't apply to everybody. And as I've said, to me the answer then is not to take these children away from their parents to put them into school earlier, but actually teach the parents, or help the parents rather, and encourage the involvement of other family members to support the children within the home environment. Because even the research that finds, or say they find that early intervention is good for children, still finds that above all other factors, parental involvement is the main predicative factor of children's later good well-being, or good education, or good learning well-being, overall good mental health in the future. Another question. Tara, are you still here? She's gone. You asked about class differences. What? Could you clarify that, please? Are you right?
Talk by pressing the talk button if you want to.
Are you talking to Tara? Maisie. Tara, do you want to press you've got the microphone, would you like to press your speech button? Or type again? No typing. And no speech, no. Has Kathy Ann got her hand raised again, or?
No.
Hello, who's that?
It's Tara.
Oh, hello. Hi, Tara.
Oh, hello. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you fine, thank you.
Oh, right, thanks. I just wondered, I wondered about the class differences of your cohort. What sort of class they were?
Sorry, what?
The class differences of your home educated sample. What was
what about?
What did it look like, your class of your group? Were they mostly from a middle class background, or what?
No, they weren't mostly from a middle class background. I'm sorry, I can't remember I'd have to, oh dear, bring up my PH. No, they certainly won't. I can't give you the figures offhand, I'm sorry.
Okay.
But certainly I had a good number of families. I used a standard criteria to determine which socioeconomic group people fell into. And I had quite a large sample of lower socioeconomic group families. I think those tend to be the families of the children that withdraw later. So what I found overall is what I call from the from birthers. They're more likely to be the middle class children because their parents are feeling confident from the outset. Then within the primary age range, you've got the from birthers that never go and those parents that withdraw their children. So the ones that withdraw their children will be less likely to be middle class families, but they will be parents that thought they might like to home educate, they might have read about it, and they didn't have the confidence, so they might have said to their partner, oh, that looks like a good idea, I read about it in the tabloid press or something, and somebody says to them, what a silly idea. So they don't go ahead, and then later, during the primary years, something happens at school, and the parent then goes into the school and says, oh, I'm taking Josie out the school. And the local authority get quite wound up about these people with withdrawing their children for what they call the wrong reasons, because it might be something relatively small, but what they don't understand is that the parents that do that probably thought about home educating at an earlier time, but they didn't have the resources or the support to do it. So they just needed a niggly problem at school. So they've not actually taken their children out of school because of that problem. It's just that problem has given them the excuse. So in all the primary years, that's about half of the children, I think, that home educate. And the rest are those that withdraw in the secondary years. And they tend to be probably the children from the poorer families. They will be parents that have never, ever thought about home educating. And they really withdraw the children because their children are in a desperate situation and the parents are desperate and they've explored other options, perhaps with the school, and then they withdraw their children. And those parents are the ones that start studying themselves to try and catch up or keep up with their children.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
That's really helpful. Thanks very much.
Thank you. So I think we've finished now. Thank you very much for attending my session. Thank you. Lacey, I can't see my
Does anybody have?
Oh.
Does anybody have any more questions? If not, then if you could press the recording button again so that we can switch it off.
I can't see the record button anywhere.
Stop recording. It's at the top on the left between the BB and the load content. At least it should be.
No, it's not
at the
there.
right, sorry, on the right. No, it's on the right, it's not on the left, I'm really sorry.
I can't see it at all now. It's gone.
Really? I don't know.
I pressed it at the beginning, and then I've not seen it again.
Yeah, I remember. Okay. You can't see anything?
Nothing at all. No.
1, What do you see at the top on the right? Do you see a BB with a blackboard? Like a...
Yeah, BB, load content and the I.
Okay, and you just can't find your recording, because mine disappeared as well. I haven't been able to find mine either. So.
Oh dear. You think we're not really recording? Yeah. But I pressed it, didn't I?
Yes, it was recording as far as I remember, yeah. Okay, I'm going to ask for help.
Right.
I've asked Steve to come, hopefully.
That's funny, isn't it? That's odd, isn't it?
Yeah, weird. Yep.
Oh dear. And there's no timer where we're...
Yeah, I'm just asking Steve to help us. Oh, good grief. Let me just...
Oh, in order for the recording to process, you need to exit the room by clicking the X.
No, that's something different. But Steve's coming now. You should be here soon. Because I also don't have a record button, so I can't do anything about it either. It's funny that yours has also disappeared. But you did see it at the beginning, didn't you?
Yes. I saw it and I pressed it.
Yeah, I remember that.
But then I never looked at it again.
Yeah, he's having problems with someone else that they can't hear the speaker, the presenter. So,
right.
Don't worry about it. If you need to go, you can go. And I'll just wait.
All right. Will you be able to turn off the recording though when we find it?
I can't, but he'll have to. But it's okay. You can go if you need to go.
All right. Well, I'll go and just
It was very nice and very interesting. I'm very glad that I came. Oh, here's Steve.
Oh, thank you. Oh, there.
Okay.